Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Eugene's January 24th, 2025 program, Goals for the 2025 Oregon Legislative Session. My name is Andrew Kalk and I'm City Club's president. We're coming to you from our home at the historic Wow Hall in the heart of downtown Eugene. It's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and to all of you joining us here in person, online, and over the radio. Since 1990, City Club has been dedicated to our founding mission to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to help connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You are invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, learn something new, and take active steps to make a difference in this city and region that we love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone, so a special thank you to our Platinum, Community, and Diamond sponsors. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. More information at uoregon.edu. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support as well. Special shout out this week to our newest Sapphire sponsor, that's Summit Bank. We are proud as City Club to do our banking at Summit, and we're grateful for the contributions of Summit's employees to our club and our community. With that, I'll turn the mic over to Joel Corrin, the chair of City Club's program committee and the coordinator of today's program. Joel.
Is that for me or for Andrew? The long session of the Oregon legislature started on Tuesday. Now, today, two leaders of their respective parties will discuss the many issues the legislature will address: homelessness, taxes, environment, unfunded mandates, funding local governments are only a few. Representative Julie Fahey, Speaker of the House, will present the Democratic priorities, and Representative Lucetta Elmer, Deputy Leader of the Republican Caucus, will lay out the Republican goals. Representative Fahey represents House District 14, West Eugene and Veneta in the Oregon State Legislature. She was first elected to the House in 2016 and chosen by her colleagues to serve as Speaker of the House in 2024. Prior to becoming Speaker, she served as House Majority Leader, and during her time as Majority Leader, she served as Chair of the Rules Committee, focusing on elections, ethics, democracy, reforms. In that role, she championed an expansion of Oregon's automatic voter registration program. Representative Lucetta Elmer represents House District 24. As of 2021, the boundary for the district includes portions of Polk and Yamhill counties, as well as the wonderful wine cities of McMinnville, Yamhill, Carlton, and Sheraton, and the Grand Ronde community. She grew up on a farm. When not working on various business opportunities, Representative Elmer has a seat on numerous civic committees, from the McMinnville Chamber of Commerce to the McMinnville Downtown Association. During her first two legislative sessions, she championed workforce housing, certificate of need exemptions, and removal of senseless regulations. First, Speaker Fahey.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Fahey, Speaker of the Oregon House, and I'm very proud to represent West Eugene, Bethel, and Veneta in the legislature. As many of you know, I'm relatively new to the role of Speaker. This is going to be my first session that I preside over. And I am the first Speaker or Senate President from Lane County to preside over a session since the early 90s when Larry Campbell was Speaker. And I want to just start my remarks today by talking a bit about how much that really matters to me, especially in the context of where 4 of our 5 statewide elected officials are from the Portland metro area, as well as almost all of our legislative leadership. I really see part of my job to bring a perspective from a different part of the state to our work in the legislature. There's a lot that we do well here in Lane County. We don't have a public defense crisis, so the number of unrepresented defendants in our county is near 0. On homelessness, with the funds that the legislature has allocated, last year, we in Lane County rehoused more households than any other county in Oregon. In fact, we were twice as high as the next highest county. With the early literacy and summer learning funds from the legislature, the Bethel School District created what was, in my opinion, one of the best summer learning programs in the entire state. And in the county, we have a solid plan to significantly increase access to behavioral health care with the proposed stabilization center and behavioral health hospital in Springfield. A lot more to come on that, of course. So I think that the rest of the state has a lot to learn from our county and what we do well. And of course, we also have our challenges in this county, and I bring those perspectives to the statewide level as well. One of the big ones, of course, is access to healthcare with the closure of our hospital in Eugene and the corporate takeover of some of the key clinics here in this area. Some of our school districts, including Bethel and Fern Ridge, have pretty high percentages of special education students and aren't receiving enough funding from the state to serve them. And we continue to have high housing costs and high rates of homelessness despite the progress we've made on those issues. We have a lot of work to do in the legislature this year on those challenges and a number of other big issues as well. We have to make sure that our government is working and that it is working for everyday people. To me, that means being able to afford housing and healthcare and childcare and people not sleeping on the streets, and an education system where our students are showing up ready to learn and are getting a quality education. And it means a transportation system that is safe and efficient. So let's talk about the legislative session and some of the things that we're going to be focused on in Salem this year. And I want to start with affordability. We have heard really loud and clear from Oregonians that is an issue that is very top of mind: cost of living and affordability. We will focus on making Oregon more affordable for families across the state. There are certainly national or global factors that we can't influence at the state level, but there are big ticket items that we can make a difference on: housing, healthcare, utilities in particular. On housing, we're going to work to continue our commitments on housing investments, and we'll partner with the governor to meet the ambitious goals that she has set on production, including for affordable housing. On healthcare, we'll take up additional legislation on the cost of prescription drugs, and we will renew our Medicaid financing system to ensure that Oregonians don't lose access to the critical care that they need, and that providers have the resources they need to serve our entire community, not just those who are on the Oregon Health Plan. 1 in 3 Oregonians are covered under the Oregon Health Plan, including half of all children. So it's really important that we get that right, not just for the folks who are on OHP, but for the funding that supports OHP also supports our broader healthcare system, including critically access to maternity care. On utilities, we'll consider making some changes to the rate setting process and ensuring that as we see rising demand from electricity, from data centers and other big industrial users, that those folks are paying their fair share and that the costs for that increased demand in our state are not being shifted onto residential customers. On transportation, we also know that Oregonians in all corners of the state want a transportation system that is safe, efficient, and reliable. That means getting to and from school or work with fewer hassles, bridges that are safe and seismically resilient, and it means transit, bike, and pedestrian infrastructure that gives people options for how to get around. But the way we fund our transportation system is rapidly becoming outdated, and it's insufficient to cover the cost of basic maintenance, operations, and safety needs. We aren't alone in this problem. Every state in the country is grappling with this. And so we'll take it on this session: how do we modernize our transportation funding system? On education, one of the most important responsibilities of the legislature is to fund our schools. It is the biggest thing that we spend general fund on in this state. But those investments can't be a blank check. We have to ensure that student outcomes in our K-12 schools are improving and that we have concrete, evidence-based plans to get there. We'll focus on funding and updating our funding, the way we fund our schools this session, but also on accountability and making sure our districts are delivering results. I think accountability more generally is going to be one of the themes that we see in this legislative session. And that means making sure that agencies are spending our taxpayer dollars wisely, and that we are getting real results for the money that we are investing. And it also means some changes to how the legislature does our work in terms of the oversight of state agencies. On top of all of that, we know that with the change in the federal administration, there might be things that we need to respond to coming out of the federal government. I truly believe that in the legislature at the state level, we can't be distracted by the new administration, but we are ready to fight for Oregonians if and when the time comes. Based on what we saw during the last Trump presidency, we know that there will be times when the values we have as Oregonians are at risk. In the first four-year term, we took action in the legislature to protect our values, including when the federal government rolled back clean air, clean water, drinking water regulations. We said we'd like to keep those in place in Oregon. We also codified Roe v. Wade to protect access to abortion. And we know that there will be other things that we may need to respond to this term. We are ready to protect Oregon's values, and we will defend our constitutional rights and basic freedoms. Of course, there will be other important work happening in other issue areas as well, keeping up our focus on homelessness, on behavioral health care, on addiction treatment, public safety, including gun violence prevention and supporting victims of crime, wildfire prevention and response, climate and the environment, public defense, and a whole host of other things that I'm sure the audience here today will ask us, Representative Elmer and I, about. There's always a very long list of things that come before us as a legislature, but priorities are important. In the 2024 session last year, we had a very successful session, and part of the key to that success was that we were pretty narrowly focused on a small set of issues, on housing and homelessness, on addiction and community safety, and on campaign finance reform. I think just like last year's session, you will see some significant overlap between the priorities that I talked about and the ones that are laid out by Representative Elmer and the Republicans, making Oregon more affordable, fixing our schools, addressing homelessness, making it easier to build houses, and holding state agencies accountable. I think that's good news. It's a signal that both parties are really listening to what Oregonians want us to work on, and that people are being very clear about what their priorities are. Sometimes we'll have the same, some of the same ideas about how we get there, and sometimes my Republican colleagues will have some different ideas. But we all know that we need to step up and work together on some of these big issues that our state is facing. I just very strongly believe that we make better policies and better decisions when we have all perspectives represented at the table and when all voices are heard and considered. Democrats and Republicans, urban, suburban and rural, people from different professions, genders, races, life statuses, and family statuses. And my experience, being someone who represents a different part of the state and bringing Lane County's perspective to the state level, I think often about how folks on the coast or in Southern Oregon or in Eastern Oregon face those same challenges in getting their communities and what's going well and what their challenges are heard at the state level, maybe even times two. And so that really informs how I think about my work as speaker. And my commitment has been that regardless of what people's ideologies are or what their political party are, if you're a legislator who is willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work, who cares deeply about getting things right, there is a seat at the table. I think we're really lucky in Oregon to have legislators in both parties who are serious about getting the work done, who aren't just interested in grandstanding or in scoring political points, but who really want to make people's lives better. For the people we serve all around the state, things like having safe roads to drive on and access to affordable health care and good schools for their kids, those aren't partisan issues. So I know we have a lot of work to do this session, and I'm really looking forward to your questions about everything that we might take on, and would love to turn it over to Representative Elmer.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. It was an hour and 45-minute drive on a beautiful Friday, so it wasn't bad at all. My name is Lucetta Elmer, State Representative for House District 24, which was previously mentioned. I do represent a lovely area of the Valley, as similar to what you have here. But I always like to extend an invitation. Please come visit anytime. We have lovely wines, which you also have. We have wonderful restaurants, beautiful hotels. McMinnville's downtown won best small downtown west of the Mississippi, so worth checking out. So anyways, you are invited warmly. This is my second term in the legislature, and this one looks a little different. As I mentioned, I am deputy leader for the Republican caucus. I'm excited for this new chapter and to take on all that entails. Before joining the legislature, I have lived a long life. I've lived in my district my whole life, or most of it, and went to school there, graduated both high school and college in District 24. So graduated from Linfield University with my degree in elementary education, but I also wandered over to Salem, and I entered at Chemeketa Community College because I wanted to study early childhood education and get a certificate for that specific area. So with all of that, I have taught in several different schools and in my community, and I have decades of education experience. I'm also a mom of 4, married to my high school sweetheart for over 30 years. And so education is something, and families, that I'm very passionate about. The most exciting news, though, the most exciting for myself, is that this spring I am going to be a grandmother. 2 of my 4 children are expecting 10 days apart from each other. One is having a little boy, one is having a little girl. So I can't even wait. And when that day comes, if you see me run off the floor, you'll know why. So what are the Republican goals? What are our top lines? I'm going to start with just kind of an overview, and then I'll dig in a little deeper. But one thing that I can say is that Speaker Fahey and I are similar in a lot of ways, and she mentioned that we are going to have similar goals that we're bringing forward because you, Oregonians, you have voiced major opinion loud and clear, and we've heard that. And so we do want to work together to meet those goals and to show that we can make a difference for Oregonians. Overall, I think that it's important to remember that while we represent the minority part of the state, we represent a majority of the state geographically speaking. So I too represent a rural area. McMinnville and McMinnville's the largest city in my district, and then much smaller after that for the cities that are represented. And that is the largest geographical area in our state. We are a very rural state. So my party wants to just make sure that as the minority, that those voices are being heard. I also know that Oregonians want a government that works for them and produces real results. We've heard that loud and clear. We know that Oregonians want solutions on our biggest challenges, which, as Speaker Fahey mentioned, are homelessness, cost of living, education, and housing. We know that Oregonians are going to measure our success based on real results and outcomes, and not just more bills passed or additional taxpayer dollars spent. So diving in a little deeper, I'm going to start with cost of living. Our overall cost of living is 31% higher than the national average. That's crazy. And I know you feel it. I feel it. We all feel it. You know, going to the grocery store, filling up our car, paying that rent or mortgage every month. I mean, it's real, and it's taking its toll. So I think that we can do better. I mean, this state is beautiful. We have so much to offer. It is not a hard sale to tell my extended family or friends that are not from Oregon why they should come here. You know, we're diverse. We have the beach, we have the mountains, we have the valleys, we have the high desert, we have the good wine, we have the good beer. We are a beautiful state that has so much to offer. But when they see that we are 31% higher than the national for cost of living, that can be a hard stop. And we know that in Oregon, we are in a decline population state right now. We're in a declining business growth as well. And those are two things that I just really want to flag as things that I want to move the dial on and change so that our state can heal and have even more to offer. So some of the bills that Republicans will be bringing forward around this topic, we have no tax on overtime. We have a bill around that. And we have a bill around no tax on tips. You know, growing up in a rural area, I worked from high school all the way through college as a waitress. And those tips, they were important to me. And that was how I could buy my books, and that's how I could survive, you know. Everywhere I had to drive was a long way when you live in a rural community. So no tax on tips and overtime, I think, would be a real tangible solution that we could give back to Oregonians. And if our Republican leader, Christine Drazan, were here today, she would say this. She has said it many times. Her motto about new taxes is that all new taxes should be closed on arrival, or should be dead on arrival. Dead, closed, either way. Moving on to housing. One second. As previously mentioned, Governor Kotek has set a goal to build 36,000 housing units annually. We have fewer than 12,000 permits, I believe, that have been issued so far. So we have a lot of work to do. The housing crisis has gotten worse because, as you know, costs are up, right? Costs are up for housing, supply is stagnant, we have regulation that's continually compiling. So these are all, again, red flags, and we have to come up with something that's going to move the dial on that. We have to find ways that we can work around the regulatory roadblocks. And one of the things that I was able to do that I'm very proud of during short session was pass a housing bill, House Bill 3440, I don't even know, it doesn't matter. There was a housing bill that was passed by Rep. Elmer. And what it did was, as a freshman, I really wanted to lean in and listen, not think that I could show up with and solve the state's problems, but really listen. And what I heard was that we have a big problem with our infrastructure. And we also have a goal set forth by our governor to build more houses. Well, you can't build houses without infrastructure. So we did an ask through the Mayor's Association across the whole state, and we identified land that was within the UGB that was shovel-ready to go, had a developer in place, and it wasn't moving. So then we asked the question, why isn't it moving? So much of it was because of infrastructure costs. It was too much to make the bottom line pencil if housing was actually produced. So as a private business owner, which now thinking about this, I forgot to tell you, after my education, I did move into the private business world, which is currently what I do. I married an entrepreneur and came from an entrepreneur family. So I'm very familiar with business, small business. We have a diverse portfolio in my family of a coffee shop and a boutique hotel, a reclaimed wood business, and several real estate endeavors, and mostly including RV parks. So I have some knowledge around housing. But looking at this infrastructure, I thought, you know, how are we going to handle this? Coming from the private business world, I am a firm believer that if we can form private-public partnerships, we are going to be more efficient, and we are going to make those taxpayer dollars go further. And that was my goal with this bill. So we identified the projects, and I said, if we could use public dollars to offset that infrastructure cost, then would those private developers move forward with their building and give back 30% of every door built at a workforce housing price? They unanimously said yes. So we got to work, and we vetted every project across the state. We had several. At the end of the day, when the bill got passed, not all of the projects stayed in the bill. That wasn't my decision, but I was happy that some did. And those that got across the finish line are right now in progress and creating new housing for Oregon. And 30% of all of those doors will be priced at workforce housing. So that's an example of how I think a common sense solution where we work together could really produce some tangible outcomes for Oregonians. Next, I want to talk about homelessness. Oregon's homeless population is one of the largest in the nation. Again, another red flag. And we are also leading the nation in unaccompanied homeless youth. As an educator, as a mom, as a human, that breaks my heart. And I want to do better for our youth. So again, another big red flag that we want to work on moving the dial for this during this long session. I believe that Oregon needs to audit the effectiveness of our current investments and then maintain and expand investments in addiction and mental health supports. And personally, I have some bills around the certificate of need that I believe would reduce regulation and how we could build some more treatment centers and have access to, from Oregonians to have access for more beds. When we talk about education, as you know, near and dear to my heart, I just want to point out that even with record spending, we're still seeing that Oregon student achievement rates and high school graduation rates remain some of the worst in our nation. So, we can agree on both sides of the aisle that we want to fully fund schools. We have. But it's still not producing the results we want. So I'm not here to say that money doesn't matter. It matters, and we need to fund our schools. But even with that happening, there's still something missing. And so I think we need to really look hard into what is that and why. Let's look at some of our neighbors. Let's look at some of our other states and see what's working for them and see if that might work here too in Oregon. But let's think outside of the box because our kids deserve so much better. Some of the Republican goals that we have for around education would be restoring the graduation requirements. We have to have a benchmark of measurable outcomes. I also think that it's okay to think outside of the box and talk about expanding school choice. I'm a fan of public school, but I just want to put all choices out there because we do need to turn the dial, and what we're doing just simply isn't working. I also think that expanding summer school opportunities to make up those learning gaps is a super smart solution. Sounds like you've been doing some of that here. Good job. I think that as a state, we could look to this model and we could continue that. When we talk about transportation, I really think the tagline for us is getting back to basics. The goal of our transportation infrastructure is simple. It's to move people, it's to move goods, it's to move services, right? So if we just get back to the basics, we know that Oregonians want their roads plowed, they want them usable, they want them to be safe, we want our potholes fixed. My 82-year-old dad who lives on our property in my backyard, I have coffee with him every morning. And a couple weeks ago, he told me that he wanted to join the transportation committee. And I said, well, which one is that, Dad? He goes, I don't care. I just want to be part of it because I'm tired of getting lost in the potholes. So I think he speaks for many of us, that we want our cars and trucks to be able to get where they're going without all the congestion. We don't want to pay more and get less, and that is also something significant. So some of the Republican bills that we are looking to bring forward this session would be to ban tolling. It would be to repeal the DEQ's rules banning diesel trucks. We want to look at deregulation because, like I previously mentioned, we don't want to spend more but get less. Moving to addiction and drugs, we know that fentanyl has done a horrible disservice to us, and I'm sure that it has touched all parts of this state. I know from my district, I spoke on the House floor several times about heart-wrenching stories where fentanyl found its way to our schools in some of our rural communities. And it was just, it is terrible. So we need to make sure that we are keeping our eye on that and that we are doing everything we can to, again, move the dial on this issue as well. As you know, I mean, every overdose, every exposure, it represents not just a statistic, but that is a life. And that hits our heart. That's a humanitarian issue, a parent, a child, a loved one. So Republicans are committed, as I'm sure our Democrats colleagues are as well, to an approach that is going to change this. Our approach, though, is set forth as we want to see tougher laws, we want to see better treatment options, and we want to see smart policies. We want to fight the fentanyl crisis, and we definitely want to protect our communities. We do not want to get lost in the politics around this. We just simply want to see some results. Some of the bills that we're looking to bring forward would be tougher penalties for the drug traffickers and localized rehabilitation treatment centers. Lastly, I will touch on crime and public safety. On this one again, Oregon making the news as being ranked as the 8th most dangerous state. That is not a statistic that I want to see. We deserve to feel safe. You guys deserve it. We deserve it. Oregonians want to feel safe. We want to feel protected in our communities. So we must reverse our dangerous catch and release policies that allow violent criminals to roam the streets. And we want to add protections for victims and increase accountability to those most violent offenders. So it really is a balanced approach that we want to offer the treatment, but we want to hold people accountable, because we want to move the dial on this, and we want all Oregonians, like I said, to feel safe and protected. So we have just finished week 1. There is a long road to go. We have much to do, but I just want to thank you for having me down to Eugene to be able to talk about what our priorities are. As going into my 3rd year, I can't say that I've been in the building a long time, but I will say to get my housing bill across the finish line last year took a lot of effort to build relationship. It was a hugely bipartisan bill. I received 48 out of 60 aye votes in the House and 30 out of 30 aye votes in the Senate. So I understand the value of collaboration, and I am looking forward to this long session to produce some real results for Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. We will begin question and answer in just a moment, but first a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station KLCC FM 89.7 for broadcasting City Club programs Monday nights at 7 p.m. For those listening at home or in the car right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning into City Club on KLCC, and we love that you are here. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as on our YouTube channel and as podcasts. We'll take a brief break and then return with questions. Thanks. All right.
Welcome back. It's now time for questions and answers for Representative Julie Fahey and Representative Lucetta Elmer. First question, Mary Layton.
Hi, Mary Layton, I'm a City Club member for a long time. So first a comment and then a question. Both of you commented on how important it was to listen to your constituents and do what they say. I suspect that Marty Wilde and Charlie Conrad will explain that if you do that, you will get primaried and thrown out of office. So I think both parties need to work on. I get you need party powers, but I think you need to work on what happens when you listen to your voters and they don't agree with what the party is recommending. For example, releasing known criminals. So one of the comments made was no taxes on tips or overtime. I worked my way through college as a waitress too, and I probably wouldn't have paid much taxes on the on the tips. I wasn't that good. But I was also making little enough money that the government paid me at the end of the year. So I didn't worry so much about that. But we have not enough money to pay for basic services. I spent my career in education. We got a lot of kids living in poverty. We have a lot of kids who need special handling so they can bloom the way they are planted and become productive members of the community. Cutting taxes in Oregon is not a strategy that seems likely to provide what we need. And diverting public taxes to schools of choice flies in the face of abundant evidence that what school choice results in is increased inequities. So what I'm asking you to think about, and tell me what your first ideas are, how do you propose to adequately fund, for example, education, healthcare, housing, if the first thing you think about is how we can cut taxes?
We'll start with Representative Elmer.
Thank you. Lucetta Elmer. Thank you for the question. So I think it is important to say, again, that we have fully funded the asks for education, still not getting the results that we want. So as I said earlier, I agree that schools need money. I completely agree with that. But I think that we have to be efficient in how we're using it. And that's where I think we need to look. And that goes probably across all of our agencies. We need to make sure that we are looking into our efficiencies. We're making sure that our government agency have the tools they need to do their job correctly, but then also asking for transparency and accountability in how they're doing that.
Representative Fahey?
Thanks, everyone. So I want to take a half step back and talk about our budget. And so that question, what's behind that question, I think, is about the revenue that we bring in a state and what we have to spend on services to meet the many needs that we have talked about. So the one of the legislature's primary responsibility is to set our budget for the next 2 years. That's what we're required to do constitutionally. And we have to balance our budget. We're not like the federal government. We can't, deficit spend. So how we do that is we say when our state economists project how much in revenue, how much in taxes are we going to bring in over the next 2 years, and then that's what we have available in the legislature to spend or to put aside for a rainy day. And our budget picture for the next 2 years is okay. We're in a lot better position than many other states are. We will have enough to, fund. We're not going to be in a cuts environment. We're not going to have a significant surplus either. So what that means is that we're going to still need to be very smart about how we spend our resources and taxpayer dollars. I think that's a pretty good thing. We also have a pretty healthy reserve fund, so we know that if we have in our next economic downturn, we're pretty well positioned to help maintain our basic services that Oregonians rely on. I will say that from a budget perspective this year, I think there is more uncertainty than is usual. So we've got some uncertainty at the federal level about, that we rely heavily on funding from the federal government for Medicaid, for example. So if there are changes made to that, that will substantially negatively impact our state budget. Also, from an economic perspective, we're a trade-dependent economy. If there are tariffs that are imposed, that will negatively impact our revenue picture for the next few years as well. So that is, from an overall perspective, I wanted to just talk about where we are in terms of funding our services. We are also about at the middle of the pack from a taxes perspective when you look to other states. We're not very high or not very low. So we are fairly well positioned right now. I think we're going to be making some additional investments in our education system. We've changed how we determine the current service level for the education budget for our schools, and so we'll take that up this year as well.
Okay. Paul?
Paul Thompson, a longstanding City Club member. The topic is the Oregon Death with Dignity statute. And specifically, what I'm interested in is, are you aware of any proposed legislation which would modify that statute to make it more available to individuals who are desiring to end their life? If you're familiar with some legislation, maybe you could tell us about the content and where you stand on supporting that. If there isn't any legislation, maybe you would comment on what your attitude would be toward that kind of legislation if it came across your desk.
Representative Fahey?
Thank you. So we've just started the legislative session this year, and for better or for worse, there are a couple of thousand bills that have been filed. And so there is no chance that all of those bills are going to pass, to be clear, or even get a hearing. But I'm not aware of any legislation specifically proposed about death with dignity. That doesn't mean that there isn't something in that pile of bills that just hasn't risen to my level of awareness yet. We have had proposals in the past to expand death with dignity in specific ways. I recall one about the statute says that you need to self-administer, and maybe expanding that out for folks who are not able to no longer able to move. But there hasn't been I don't believe that there will be things proposed this session for that.
Go ahead.
Representative Elmer.
Representative Elmer?
I don't really have anything else to offer. I have not heard of any legislation coming forward.
Next question, please.
Hi, Kelly Johnson, City Club member. Thank you both for being here today. And I have a question, and I have to admit, I don't really fully understand what I'm talking about. So put it out there front.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah, thanks. Our city government here in Eugene is facing, I think, an $11.5 million budget gap that they're trying to fill. And in recent council sessions, I've been hearing that the city being in a deficit is a continual problem that we have because of some state rules that make it harder for the city to collect money. Is there anything proposed at the legislature this year that would make it easier for cities to collect the money they need to run their cities?
Speaker Fahey?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. It is a challenge just specifically in the last year and for the next couple of years. Many local governments, not just in Oregon, but in all over the country, are facing budget challenges because many of them relied on some of the federal resources they received during the pandemic through the American Rescue Plan Act that was passed to bolster their city budgets and their local budgets. And so that funding has gone away now. And so there are many cities all over the country that are struggling to figure out how do we keep offering the services that we have offered for the last few years with those resources going away. To be clear, that is also happening at the state level. So our federal resources from the pandemic era have also gone away. We are just somewhat better positioned from a budget perspective than some of the local governments right now. I think what you're referring to is some of the rules around property taxes. And some of those came into effect with ballot measures that were passed during the 1990s, Measure 5 and 50. And so those constrict what local governments are able to, from a property tax perspective, they constrict what local governments are able to bring in. I think any changes to those measures require very careful consideration. And it's not likely something that we're going to take up this session, but certainly the cities and other entities are interested in a longer term conversation about how we might reform those. I think to this question and an earlier question about taxes, Oregonians are very clear that cost of living and affordability is a key thing that they're worried about right now. And so I think that if the legislature is going to consider any increases in tax and fees, we have to be very thoughtful about that. And so on the transportation funding that we are looking at, we've gone over a year-long process of touring the state and listening to communities and constituents about not only what their needs are, but what funding solutions they might support to meet those needs. And so any time we're thinking about tax increases that will impact Oregonians, we have to be very thoughtful about it. And so an overview of local tax revenue would be a multi-year process to make sure we get it right.
Representative Elmore?
Thank you. I'll just add a very thorough answer, so thank you. The only thing that I would add is just that, there is obviously finite amount of money that is collected for county tax, city tax, state, federal. You have your different revenue sources, but because those monies are going away that we saw during the pandemic, and because the future is uncertain about some of the other revenue streams where we would get money, cities, and in my district, I'm hearing we need to be very thoughtful how we're looking at our budget. And from a state perspective, I keep hearing often that we need to be careful and thoughtful when we are allocating money for a new program. Is it a program that will be able to be sustainable, or is it one that's going to have to come back and have that ask again? So that, again, just things that we're considering, and like Speaker Fahey said, I mean, a multi-year process to look and do a deep dive into all of that. But thank you for that question.
Next question, please.
I'm David Eigel. I'm just a private citizen, born and raised in Eugene, Oregon, although I've lived other places. My concern is I'm not a history buff, I'm a history addict. And in 2016, the University of Oregon had a program where they were going to research and decide whether Professor Dunn's building name should be denamed. And I was interested in this topic even before this came up, and I read their report, and I recognized right away it's full of misinformation. And in the years to come, I've thoroughly researched the matter, completely documented it, and it's a complete fraud. I mean, they literally use fraudulent documentation to come to the result. Professor Dunn was actually from one of the most heroic abolitionist families in the United States. He was Dave Frohmeyer before Dave Frohmeyer. So where I'm getting with this is, in the course of this, I've discovered a great deal of fraud and misrepresentation that's being state-funded as well as local governments. I will be lobbying the legislature this season.
Is there a question? Would you answer
Oh,
the
yes,
question, please?
here it comes. The question is, will you designate yourselves or someone else when I provide the information who can review it, and it won't be challenged? Will you do that?
Is this a statewide issue?
I think I'll answer that question more generally and talk about citizen involvement in the legislature. So I think if you email my office or Representative Elmer's office with a question or where do you stand on a bill or advocacy for a bill, in the legislative level, we take very seriously our responsibility to communicate with our constituents. And so you will get a response from us. That response might be directing you towards your own state representative or state senator. But I really encourage the folks that are listening to reach out to their legislators. I read all my email, and so if constituents suggest legislation or are advocating for something, I take that very seriously. And I would put that to suggestions about legislation too. I went and spoke to the Eugene Chamber last week or the week before, and someone there made a suggestion about someone in the mortgage industry about consumers being taken advantage of by these fraudulent solicitations of loans. And I'm sort of digging into that issue, and there's a there, and so that may turn into legislation in the next session or two. So whatever your issue is, whether it's the University of Oregon or others, please do reach out to your legislators this session.
Oh, just
Thank
quickly,
you. Thank you, sir.
I was just going to add that it is involved the Oregon Historical Society, this funding of the university, et cetera. So there's a state issue here.
Thank you. Andrew?
Andrew Calix, City Club. Both of you mentioned frustration with student outcomes, and I appreciate that. So 2 questions on that. One, you both said you want to hold districts accountable to student outcomes. How does one do that as a state legislature? And then my second question is, I've been amazed. My 2 elementary school students go to school for 12 fewer days than I went growing up. And in fact, Oregon is one of the few states that has no minimum days, and in rural districts, there's even fewer days because many of them are 4 days a week. Is that something that we should look at given the importance of classroom time for student achievement? Thanks.
We'll start with Lucetta.
Thank you. Great question. I think that one way that we can hold them accountable would be to have requirements. And that was something that I mentioned as Republican bills that we're bringing forward. We need to have a measure of standard so that we know where we are. I agree with you that our children should be in school more than they are. And I think that it's important that we look at the data across our nation. I am a data-driven person, so I really like to look and see, you know, where is Oregon lining up, and those that are doing better than us, how and why. And I oftentimes reach out to colleagues in other states and ask, you know, hey, how did you know, what was the work that you did on such and such bill, and what was the process like for you, and what was the pushback? Because we don't need to recreate the wheel. We just need to figure out what's working, and then we need to implement that here.
That is an area where Representative Elmer and I completely agree. It's one of the things that I love about being in the state legislature is that we're not the only state facing many of our challenges. We can look at the laboratories of democracy in other states and see what is working and what is not. And in many cases, particularly in education, those have been studied. And there's academic research about what is truly effective and what is not. And so when it comes to accountability, I think that's a tricky conversation here in Oregon. We have a culture of local control with our school districts that perhaps is a little different than in many other states, particularly in the Midwest or in the East Coast. And you know, I think local school districts, local schools, local educators do know best, but we have to be thoughtful about what is the state's role in oversight and ensuring the districts are achieving the results that we expect. And so, you know, we have a program that was created through the Student Success Act in 2019 that can step in for our lowest performing districts and provide extra resources and technical assistance from the state to help them improve their outcomes. One of my suggestions is that program right now is optional. It's voluntary. So if a district is really struggling, you know, the educators are doing great work, you know, families are being supported, but the district policies are challenging and are not leading to good outcomes, the state should be able to step in and provide that additional assistance and resources so that they can be more successful. I would also say we've had pretty good success in Oregon around dedicated funding for specific topics. So you know, we had dedicated funding for career and technical education, which has helped us improve our high school graduation rates over the last few years. We've had, and then in the 2023 session, the legislature passed dedicated funding for early literacy and summer learning. Both things that we know, the research says, are effective at improving student outcomes. So those are sort of two areas where I think about. On the length of school year and the number of days in school, research also shows that is a very effective intervention. It is also a very expensive intervention. And so we also have to think about, you know, what are the things we can do that are evidence-based that work, and what are the most cost-effective ways as well.
Next.
Hi, my name is Kendra Jones, and I'm the Executive Director of CASA of Lane County. So court-appointed special advocates were written into statute in 1987, yet we still are very severely underfunded by the state. We're an early intervention and prevention program. We reduce homelessness, we reduce addiction long-term, and other things. We've started piloting educational advocacy, so improving those educational outcomes. My question is, how do you balance, you know, decisions on funding these really big systems like housing and looking at programs like CASA or the child advocacy centers that struggle to be able to meet the needs of the vulnerable children in our communities? How do you do that?
Yeah,
Representative Elmer.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the work you're doing. I am a big fan. That's a great question. You know, personally, and I leaning into what my caucus would say as well, is that we're going to look at the basics. So we're going to look at infrastructure, we're going to look at housing, we're going to look at schools. And we're going to healthcare. We're going to make sure that we hit these top items that Oregonians need to survive, right? And then we're going to look and see with the monies that are available at all of the plethora of requests that come our way. And they're hard decisions. But I know that something that I've heard in my short time in the legislature, when we're making those decisions, is we look at programs that do have the length of time behind them and that have shown results. I think CASA is one of those. But you know, it's subject to a lot of things. But in a nutshell, that would be my answer. But thank you for the question and for what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, the work that you do is so important and evidence-based. So for me, you know, I think one point to make about the budget is it is very challenging to balance these big systems, the Oregon Health Plan and our education system and public safety systems. When you look at our state budget, the amount of money that we have direct control over, the general fund, 90% are education, human services for seniors and people with disabilities and foster kids, healthcare, and public safety, our court system and our prison system. That's our budget. And so it's the 10% left over for all these really important smaller agencies and smaller programs that help keep our state running. It's tough to balance because these other pieces are, you know, so dominant in our budget conversation. I think for me, when I think about our state budget and making decisions, there's a number of different factors that I consider that make an ask kind of rise to the top. Evidence-based is one. Does it help us pull down federal funding is another. There's lots of federal funding that's available to states for specific programs. And then, you know, does this, when I say evidence-based, one of the things I think about is, does it save us money in the long run? Investing in kids is the best investment a state can make, especially in the prenatal to 5 time frame. So those, for me, that's what always has my heart and my brain when I'm thinking through the budget process.
Let me ask a follow-up question. The child welfare system in Oregon has been criticized for a number of different supposed failures. What is the legislature planning to do to correct those problems?
It's a good question, and I might pass to Representative Elmer first because she has worked in this space.
Okay. Good move.
So I sit on the Early Childhood and Human Services Committee, and that's just such a timely question because yesterday in committee we had the director of DHS, Department of Human Services, give us an hour-and-a-half report on all of those things. And at the end of it, I did bring up the negative media attention that the department has received for. There was, you know, a payout that went to a youth for abuse that was determined that the department neglected to stop. There was a huge fine that Oregon incurred because we, for the 3rd year in a row, didn't meet the national standard on our SNAP benefits, and there was criticism because there's multiple $1 million that we're spending with litigation fees and defending cases that are coming against us. So a lot of negative. And I said this earlier, but I will say it again. You know, I want to give respect to our department agencies. The gentleman that sat before us yesterday has been there for a very long time. I do not believe that he shows up to work and says, I'm going to fail today. I also want to make sure that we're giving our department agencies the tools they need to do their job. And so there's a mutual line of respect that legislators and agencies need to have back and forth. But my question to him was around transparency. And I said, as a business owner, I'm used to leading a staff and I'm used to having those difficult decisions. I want to make sure my staff is respected and has tools to do their job. But I have to sit before them as the owner of the business and say, hey, if we're going negative financially or if we continue to get fines, this business will cease to exist. So what are you doing, Mr. Director of DHS, to make sure that there is transparency moving forward and that we are going to change directions? And he gave a very humble, thoughtful answer. He didn't try to defend, he acknowledged, and he is working with his staff to make sure that things are in place so that we are meeting the goals and we're not incurring more fines. But that is a question that we need to just keep at top of mind and make sure that we're keeping, as legislators, our eye on these agencies and we're able to have those tough conversations with them. I would also say that we need to be thoughtful in the legislation that we pass to make sure that we are not crippling them in the job that we're asking them to do.
Speaker Fahey?
Sure. I think what Representative Elmer talked about was part of the answer of this question about agency oversight. And that is something that as a legislature, we need to take more seriously. And we have been taking steps over the last year to change the culture in the legislature so that we are focused on agency oversight and accountability. And some of that is, having agency directors in for hearings where they're questioned about something that's happening in the news or that's happening at their agencies. Where I'm not interested in sort of DC style gotcha, haul in folks for the cameras, basically. We really need to partner with our agencies as a legislature to both make sure they have what they need to be successful, but also hold them accountable. And so there's some key changes, some of the details of which are not very exciting, around training our committee chairs and other things that we have done to try and move that needle in the legislature. To the question specifically about child welfare, one of the things that I am interested in, and we have a new state senator who's going to work on this year, is moving upstream and looking more at prevention. And so we know that Oregon has a higher removal rate than other states. We remove children from their homes at a higher rate than they do in other states. And that is very harmful for our children. And so if we can invest more in the prevention work, in abuse prevention, and on supporting families, particularly in the prenatal to the first few years of life, that will help not only those kids and those families, but will help ensure that our child welfare system has the resources they need to do their job long term.
Okay. Lightning round. Quick question, quick answer.
Hi. We've had a lot of wildfires. Last year was ridiculous. We had trouble paying the bills because we had to have people from other states come in. I'm not really sure how we fix that. Are you going to be fixing that?
I guess my lightning round answer to that question is hopefully so. Last year was the worst most expensive wildfire season on record. We had 1.9 million acres burned. And we had to convene a special session in December to make sure that our contractors could be paid. The way we fund wildfire prevention and response has not kept up with the increasing fires with climate change. And so Representative John Lively from Springfield has been involved in a work group along with Bobby Levy from the eastern part of the state to try and figure out how do we fund that wildfire system. What is the responsibility of private landowners versus the state as a whole? It's a big, complicated topic, not suited for a lightning round, but we're gonna take it on this session.
Representative Elmer? Quick
I'll
response.
try to be super fast, but I guess this would probably be one of the answers where we don't exactly line up. I come from a family. My father owned a timber business, and I think that our money should be prioritized in making sure that we are managing our timber grounds in a different manner.
Thank you. That's all for today. Sorry. Okay. But our time's up.
It segues right into what they were talking about.
Andrew?
We'll hang around and we can pepper them with more questions. This is what you get for being here in person. Please join me in thanking our speakers one more time. Thank you. This has been our January 24th, 2025 conversation at the City Club of Eugene. We have another special program at a very special place next Friday, January 31st, titled Preparing the Next Generation of Indigenous Leaders. We'll have a chance to hear from 2 Indigenous students from the University of Oregon, as well as Jason Yonker, the chief of the Coquille tribe and an assistant vice president at the UO. And we'll do it all from the Many Nations Longhouse on campus. So don't come to Wow Hall next week. Meet us on campus for this special program. And last but certainly not least, we have a monumental birthday to celebrate this week. Founding City Club member, 62-year season ticket holder for Duck basketball, and beloved civic leader Marjorie Ramey turns the big 100. 100. I don't think Marge is here today, but I'm sure she is listening. And Marge, we just want to tell you how much we love you, how lucky we are to call you a friend and a neighbor. My kids actually say that you aren't actually old until you're 100. So Marge, we all wish to grow old like you. Congratulations, and see you all next week.